The preseason is done. Andrew Nemhard returns. Pacers beat the Cavs from that game and the entire preseason. What do we learn about the Pacers? What does it mean for the regular season? And what else do we need to talk about from the 4 exhibitions? We'll talk about it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are wrapping up preseason. Pacers finished up on Friday with a win over the Cavs. No Darius Garland, no Jared Allen. Fewer questions answered, and yet some more questions did get answered. Andrew Nemhard played. We got a glimpse of the rotation. We saw other players have success for the first time of the preseason, like Buddy Hield. So still a lot to dive into from that game, specifically answering more questions about the Pacers from the preseason and general preseason thoughts as it pertains to the regular season. We'll get to all that today, but not after I point out that I'm wearing a Phillies hat. Game 6 tonight, you will see a very psyched Tony East on Tuesday's Locked On Pacers, or a very scared and nervous Tony East on tomorrow's Locked On Pacers, depending on what happens starting at 5:07 tonight. Go Phillies. None of you care. Let's talk about the Pacers, who wrapped it up with a win over the Cavs. Score doesn't matter. Result doesn't matter. It's preseason. But what did happen is we got more questions answered, and we got to see Andrew Nemhard. We'll talk about him a little bit in the second segment. But as you know what we do, we answer the core questions that were had about this team heading into the preseason and the regular season, what we learned from it in this game. And what I'll do this time is I'll answer what the answer was in this game against the Cavs and what it is from the whole preseason. You'll see what I mean as we get to the very first one. For example, one of the questions we asked every single game was the starters. Is it the lineup that was expected all summer? And if so, was it good enough that it can be expected into the regular season? For the second game in a row, the answer was yes. The Halliburton, Mathurin, Brown, Toppin, Turner group opened the game against the Cavs, and they did very well this time after being a -1 against the Hawks 3 days prior. They were plus 15 against the Cavs, 49-34. They played over 20 minutes. So clearly, that's a long time for any lineup. Obviously, starters are going to play the most, but impressive they were able to get them out that long. 49-35, not 34. So plus 14, still fantastic. And that's important. One, because, of course, that group's trying to grow and get better. But, before the Hawks game, Rick Carlisle said, quote, "There's a presumptive starting lineup. That's just that, presumptive. I'm very interested to see how they play tonight. It's not a foregone conclusion that will be our starting group." Pacers were still evaluating, right? They had all these competitions. They wanted guys to earn it. That included lineups, not just players. And so they can't just hand it to these guys, right? There is some level of earning it, even with a lineup like this. But I think that this game really cemented it. We saw 2 games in a row at the same 5 for the first time, right? Tice started in there once. McConnell was in there. Injuries changed things up, certainly. But this time is the second game in a row. We saw the same starters again, and they looked a lot better for a number of reasons that we'll talk about on this show. But I think that, one, we learned from this game that they like that lineup as what they would hope to be their opening 5 to start the regular season. And 2, from the whole preseason, that's likely going to be the opening 5 on Wednesday. But the third point would be the fact that it looked that good really hammered it home, right? The fact that with that group out there, Toppin had his best game. Halliburton was making his usual plays. Bruce Brown found space to get open from 3. Like, everybody just did their job. It worked great. I think we have our answer for the Pacers starting 5 heading into the regular season from that game. Question 2, a very common one we've been answering after these preseason games. Who was the backup center? This one has been very dynamic throughout the preseason, but I think we get an answer once again from this one. It's the guy we talked about last Friday, Jalen Smith. Jalen Smith was the backup 5 once again. If you track the center rotation every game, the first game of the preseason, Miles Turner started. Isaiah Jackson backed him up. So at that point, it looked like Isaiah Jackson might have it. In the second game, Daniel Tice started, and Isaiah Jackson backed him up. But then Isaiah Jackson got in foul trouble, and Daniel Tice struggled a little bit. And Jalen Smith was awesome. He didn't miss a shot. And since then, it's been Miles Turner starts, Jalen Smith backs him up in every preseason game. And Jalen Smith had probably his worst preseason game against the Cavs. In fact, certainly his worst preseason game against the Cavs. But I still think he did enough to earn the backup center spot. I think that if I had to guess the pecking order of the depth chart for the Pacers right now, it would be Miles Turner, Jalen Smith, Isaiah Jackson, Daniel Tice as the backup 5s. And Jalen Smith earned that. He had a pretty good preseason. He looked better than any other center besides Miles Turner, who actually played minutes. And the consistent pattern from game to game suggests he earned more playing time and played well enough to be deserving of the backup 5 minutes to open the season. That could obviously be fluid, but he earned that. And that was the case in this Cavs game once again, although the Pacers bench just got completely annihilated in this game. Even guys who had good games. Buddy Hield was 6 for 8 from deep, and they still got smoked in his minutes, right? Jalen Smith, they got smoked in his minutes. McConnell, Nemhard, we'll talk about all those guys. But the bench unit was not very good. In this game, Jalen Smith, a big part of that. So the rotation questions answered about the starters. I think we have a good idea there. About that backup 5, we have a good idea there. But there's still more rotation questions to be answered, and we'll get to those in a second. Question 3, we've been asking after every preseason game. Obi Toppin, the new Pacer with some question marks. Bruce Brown's a new Pacer without as many question marks. Did Obi Toppin look good? And every game, I think he's gotten better in the preseason, which has been very interesting. And this time, yes, the answer is yes, right? Jaren Jackson did not make him look good in their opener. His defense was atrocious that night. He's had a little easier assignments every game, but this was his best game, I think. Not the greatest defense again, like Georges Niang put him under the rim a few times, but this was his best rebounding game. He had 9 boards, and if you remember, after their second game against the Rockets, I said the rebounding was the thing that made him look much better than he did against the Grizzlies. He got a little bit better on the glass every time, and Rick Carlisle has now shared with us that that's something he's challenged Toppin to be better at this season. And I think that's been a big part of his effectiveness increasing, is just being able to not only help them in transition, but be a guy who gets them into transition, right? So that is, of course, important. His defense still has strides to go, but offensively, his best game, certainly 6 for 9 from the field. In East Bay between the legs, it was sick. Is that redundant? East Bay between the legs? I think it is. 6 for 9 from the field. I think he had 4 baskets in the half court, and he had 2 leakouts. So a lot of good cutting. He made a 3. Like, this was, in general, his most wide-ranging impact in one game, and they won his minutes. He was their leading scorer until pretty late in the game when Buddy Hield went crazy from deep. So credit to Obi Toppin. He got a little better every game. Cemented to me that he will open the season as the starter at the 4, because he did look good in this game, especially on offense. But the defense is still concerning, right? Carlisle said it's something they've talked about. It's something he knows he needs to work on. He absolutely has to be better on that end of the floor. I think he's probably been the weak link in the – actually, there's no probably. I think he's been the weak link in the Pacers starting 5 defensively in the preseason, and that could be the first thing that leads to some other dominoes potentially changing. But his offense was very good in this game in such a way that he was a positive player and has earned minutes. The other new guy we've been talking about a lot in the preseason is Bruce Brown. He's a new Pacer, but less questions about him because he can kind of do everything, and he has in his career. Backup point guard with the Pistons, who had some different ball handling roles even beyond that. Then he was a center with the Nets, who was like a spacing guy and a screener. And then he did a little bit of everything with the Nuggets. He has experience in so many roles. There's no doubt he can help the Pacers. If you want more on this, I just wrote a story on Sunday about how Bruce Brown's been helping them in the preseason and what his teammates think of that. And I had a really interesting back and forth. There was really only 2 questions, but still, with Rick Carlisle about how do you think about that as the coach? You have a guy who's so versatile. He can play so many roles. Like, how do you know when it's the best time to put him in for a specific role? But either way, Bruce Brown has been solid on defense. And this game, no Darius Garland. I rolled my eyes again because I've been waiting for the right matchup to see how the Pacers line up their backcourt defensively. But they still did put Bruce Brown on Donovan Mitchell a good chunk of the time. And then Mathurin was on Karis LeVert. And Halliburton was on Max Strus, which to me suggests even if Garland played, Mathurin would have been on Garland and the rest would have been the same. So we did learn a little bit there. And I asked Rick Carlisle the day after at practice, that was when he had that exchange I just referred to, and he said, Rick Carlisle said of Bruce Brown, he's always going to be one of the best options defensively on a great player. So I think we have our answer of yes, most of the time Bruce Brown's going to get the toughest assignment matchup-wise every game, and then Mathurin will get the next one, but we'll see. The Hawks would have been an interesting game to learn something there from too, but Trae Young's height, to me, changes the dynamics there. The other interesting Bruce Brown thing in this game, he noted this at practice the following day. He took six shots against the Cavs. All of them were threes. He said he can't remember a game in his life where he didn't take a 2-point shot. He made half of them. He said he's feeling wide open. Like, he doesn't remember ever being this wide open. So, again, another role he could fit into, a floor spacer. If he makes threes, that's great. So, good Bruce Brown game. We learned a little more about him in this one, I think. So we have our answers for a lot of stuff, but we still have questions that we've been talking about all preseason. The rookies, Ben Mathurin, other rotation stuff. We'll get to that in the second segment and some more overarching preseason thoughts to close out today's show. But before we get to all that, I have to tell you guys about the Gametime app, something I personally used when I was in New York to go watch the New York Liberty play the Dallas Wings, and it was fantastic. It was one of the best ticket buying experiences I've ever had. No more frustrating times where you can't figure out exactly what you're going to see in your seat or if your price is even the best price. Instead, with Gametime, they have killer last minute deals. You see your all-in price, you can see the views from your seat, and they have a best price guarantee. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Just use Gametime to buy tickets to whatever event you're going to, comedy, theater, sports. They have deals on tickets right at the start of the event, even an hour before it starts. They have exclusive flash deals. They have sponsored deals on tickets, and they have zone deals. So you pick the section, and Gametime picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. And the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pictures your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, it's Monday, so I can do this. Locked On Colts, here about our football brethrens here in Indy. Tough game against the Browns. Not tough in terms of how they played, although giving up 39 points is tough. Tough because the ending, controversial, referees involved. Zach and Jake will have more at Locked On Colts. I had to learn about some rules to figure out what was going on at the end of that one. I am not football inclined enough to make an opinion, but lots of football people will, including Jake and Zach on Locked On Colts. Here in Pacerland, we have to continue talking about Pacers, Cavs, and preseason takeaways in general for the Indiana Pacers. Something else we've been asking after every game has been about the effectiveness of the two first-round pick rookies for the Pacers and their spot in the rotation. And I think this is a very telling thing that we're going to have to talk about for a few minutes here. Jarace Walker and Ben Shepherd, neither fully healthy Pacers for this Cavs game. So pretty revealing. Neither of them were in the Pacers rotation. We're in the competitive part of the Pacers rotation. 8 minutes and 37 seconds for both of them, all in the fourth quarter. Walker had a really weird pull-up jumper that made no sense, and he missed it. And he made both of his other shots, and he had 5 rebounds and an assist and a steal. Like, he did pretty good Jarace Walker-y stuff in that 8.5 minutes besides that jumper, but he didn't play with the rotation guys. Ben Shepherd went 1 for 3. He missed his only 3. His stats were just not very high. He didn't play for very much. So what can be taken away from this? Jarace Walker had a fine game. He had a great game in Memphis. He had a not-so-great game in Houston and was against the Hawks. Pretty rough against the Hawks, actually. I gave him a little too much credit there. What does this mean rotationally, these two guys coming in when they are? I think there's a chance that neither of them are in the rotation come opening night. I have said it on the show. I think it'd be a mistake to not be giving Jarace Walker those minutes. I think, though, I did just hear a great point on a different podcast about why I may be stupid to be thinking that. David Locke, founder of the Locked On Podcast Network, was on Dunked On with Nate Duncan talking about the Jazz and how the Jazz are in a similar position. They're pretty deep with a lot of guys who have a case to say they're playing for the Jazz. And David's point was basically like, they've talked about a lot in Utah, earning minutes within the concept of the team, which means it has to all have the same rubric for earning minutes. You can't say, well, this guy's earning minutes because he's young, but this other guy earned minutes because he played really well in the preseason. You have to have the same rubric for everybody to make those competitions fair. And so all of it falls apart in terms of guys earning minutes if anyone is handed a role or handed an opportunity that didn't actually earn it. And so applying that to the Pacers, the guys who played the best in the preseason should earn the minutes. And that makes sense to me from a team building perspective, from a team camaraderie perspective, and from, of course, a winning games perspective. And so the second unit for the Pacers in this game against the Cavs was TJ McConnell, Andrew Nembhard, Buddy Hield, Aaron Nesmith, and Jalen Smith. And they didn't play very well together, to be clear. Buddy Hield had an awesome shooting game. We'll talk about Nembhard's performance in more depth later. He had a really good fourth quarter, but it wasn't with that group. Jalen Smith, a little more rickety than some other games. Nesmith didn't feel him as much as other games. So maybe that group won't actually end up being good. Also in the NBA, though, you don't really just play all 5 of your bench guys at the same time that often. But either way, I do think it's interesting that, Like if you asked me to name the 10 best players for the Pacers in preseason, it would be the 10 that they played against the Cavs. Nembhard, that was his first game, but he's going to play. So that makes sense in that way. But I do think it's interesting when you draft a guy 8th and your GM talks about how you're thinking long term, you got to find a way to play him. Now, there'll be injuries, there'll be chances, something will not work, right? It's a basketball team. But I think it's interesting how it's shaking out. And I think it says a lot about the Pacers' priorities, and not in a bad way. Trying to win, and as Tyrese Halliburton said, he's tired of losing. That's great. That is great for fans. That is great for the team. And if that's the direction I think they should take, I get it. They are ready to take that step forward. They were closer than their record suggests last year to being that level of team, and maybe they're ready for that step forward. But they have to think about what it means for their rookies and try their best. I mean, Ben Shepherd had a great preseason. And Jase Walker, they picked in the lottery because they believe in him. They have to find a way to make sure they're developing those guys as good as possible if they're not going to play. And the opposite would be, or the other side of that is, trying to find them as many competitive opportunities as they can. I keep getting told by listeners I'm making too big of a deal of the minutes, and I probably am, but it is important, right? People management is going to be a big deal for Rick Carlisle. I kind of asked him about how that communication all goes on Saturday. I can't, all the days blur together because basketball is a 7-day-a-week sport during training camp and preseason and really the whole season. But Saturday, I asked Rick about that, right? And communication is really key and just making sure everybody knows what's expected of them, right? He mentioned Jordan Warren and Daniel Tice by name as two guys who have got to just be ready for an opportunity and seize it when one comes, right? So you can assume they're not going to be in the rotation. He didn't name anybody else, but that's going to be part of this for the Pacers. If I was guessing right now, just based on the last preseason game and really the totality of all four, I would guess that Jase Walker and Ben Shepherd are out, but it's possible I'm wrong. And the only guy, like TJ McConnell was so good, right? Like that's part of this. We'll talk about this in the final segment. McConnell was very good in the preseason. Jalen Smith had some excellent performances, right? It's really hard to figure out who you pull out of the rotation. So we'll see what ends up happening, but that is the direction I think this is taking, even though Jase Walker did have an okay ending. Besides, I mean, that pull-up too was really yucky, but outside of that, he played a pretty nice game. Okay, changing directions. The other question we've been asking after every game, the last one, is about Ben Mathurin. This is a big season for him in many ways. Is he fitting in? Which is to say, he's elevated. He has been elevated to the starting five. Is he adding skills to his game to let him fit in with that group? Is he fitting with Tyrese Halliburton while still being Ben Mathurin, which is an important part of this? The turnovers were shaky. This was Mathurin's worst game in that way. Again, a little bit of regression back to last year. 6 turnovers, some with sloppy handle, a bad pass or two in there. That was certainly his worst game in that department. 2 assists above his season average last year. 2 for 3 from deep, hit half his shots. Like his scoring has still come all preseason. I think that's important because he wasn't playing a normal minutes load. So like you'd expect the numbers to go up, but when the regular season starts, if Mathurin can be that level of player as a scorer, that's significant for the Pacers, right? So if he can continue to do that, Carlisle said he's talked to Mathurin about, you can get your spots and be your type of scorer within the flow of the offense. I'm paraphrasing, but that's about what it was. That'd be big for Mathurin. And I think he did a good job throughout the preseason of showing that he added some passes, right? Really good transition passes. And a few of those ones where he would drive left, the help would come into the basket, and he would make the pass across the opposite corner, right? Like that's a hard pass. The fact that he has that in his bag now is impressive. He had a nice assist to Obi Toppin on a throw in from the wing to the post in one game. He had that X out assist against the Hawks that I made, sure to point out and talk about. Like he did a lot of good stuff. The turnovers were really, really ugly in this Cavs game though. And that's still something important to note coming off of a negative assist to turnover ratio season. But in general, I thought he answered those questions pretty well in the preseason, at least giving the Pacers a good feeling like, yes, this could work. This makes sense. He fits in with this group, especially because he defended well enough to me. So those are all the questions. The rotation question is the last one. I squeezed that in with the rookies. Honestly, I talked about that more than their play, but that is very, very interesting. But the rotation, that was the second unit. And then the third unit was the other 5 guys. We did not see Kendall Brown, Oscar Tshiebwe, Daniel Tice, or Isaiah Wong. If you want to get a pecking order for the Pacers, Isaiah Jackson played a little, didn't look very good. Jordan Nwora played even less. He missed all his shots. I think we have an established pecking order, and the only thing that could disrupt it is changing goals or lineup struggles, or we'll see. But there's more preseason takeaways still to come because it's over. but we have a couple more things we want to talk about. Zoom in. There we go. On some individual players for the Pacers and what they did in these tune-up games. Before we talk about that, I want to talk about FanDuel, who are ready for you to snap into this NFL season because they're America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers on FanDuel get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's all you got to do. You can win the $5 bet or you can even lose it. You'll still get the $200 in bonus bets. You've been thinking about joining FanDuel ever? There's no better time than right now with the NFL rolling, with the NBA starting, with the MLB playoffs at nearly the peak. That is the best time to get in on the FanDuel action. Their app is easy to use, and they have a wide range of betting options, spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Whatever your favorite is, they've got it there. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, LOCKEDON, and kick off the NFL season with FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, man, there were like a trillion billion transactions in the NBA this weekend because teams had to get their rosters down. So every show will have something interesting transactionally. Pacers not among those groups right now. There are also some interesting rookie extensions you can hop over and listen to. Zeke Naji in Denver for Locked On Nuggets for that. Denny Avdia in Washington, Locked On Wizards for that. The deadline is today if you're listening on Monday at 5 p.m. Perhaps we'll see one for the Pacers, perhaps not. The two guys of the most note there would be Obi Toppin and Aaron Nesmith. Either way, we'll talk about it tomorrow. The Pacers cap perspective and everything heading into the season. Rhett Bauer will be with us once again. Let's talk about some other stuff I want to cover from this preseason, so I don't have to talk about questions answered anymore, rotational stuff, although we'll get to a little bit of that here to close this out. But it was fun. We learned a lot about the Pacers. I'm an actions over words guy. You all know that. Let's talk about Andrew Nembhard. I've been putting it off for a little bit because I have a lot of other stuff I wanted to get to, but he debuted after his kidney stone removal that happened early in the preseason, had to be surgically removed, which is why the recovery took over a week, and that's quite frankly totally fine. Best time of the season for that to happen. This was interesting. So he played next to TJ McConnell with second unit off the ball, which I thought was important because something I kept talking about with him is I wonder how much the Pacers can get him in both roles because he did very well in both last year, but did better off the ball, but is certainly projected to be better on the ball, growing, floor general type. So he finished the game with 13 points, 1 rebound, 2 assists, 2 steals. His defense was fine. The thing that's significant to me is this was his first game, but he definitely looked better, especially as a scorer, running the show, being the floor general with that third group in the fourth quarter than he did off the ball with the second unit throughout the game. And that I think is important, right? Can he continue? Can he grow? Because when he was off the ball last year, it was with Halliburton, right? It was in the easiest possible setting with this team. With the bench groups this year with McConnell, I still think it'll be easy. McConnell's a good creator, but he's going to have to adjust. It's a different style of being open. It's a different way of attacking. So if that is the second unit this year, I think he'll get some point guard reps still, but he'll have to be playing a little different. How does he look in those groups? And how can the Pacers get him maximized with those groups or with other groups? Because that is still important to the Pacers, figuring out what Andrew Nembhard is best at within the concept of their team long-term, but a fine debut. And his scoring in the fourth quarter, once he settled in, you could tell when you come in, you don't want to mess up. You want to show what you've been working on, like all that stuff. Once he settled in, he looked better, but a slow start that really came to a head in the fourth quarter. Some other preseason takeaways, some guys we have barely talked about today. We covered this in a segment early in the preseason, but Aaron Nesmith just looks better, right? A little speedier, especially with the ball. His reads of the game offensively look nice. Like he's got something else added to his game. And if it's just speed with the ball, that's enough to make him a little more threatening. I've said this before. I'll say it again. I would already have been building the rotation, making sure he's in. He's a lock now. He's going to play. The question is, what is he going to be? Is he going to be a shooter and a defender? Is he going to be a 4? Is he going to be a 3? Is he actually going to be asked to attack? Because as it looked like in the final preseason game, he was certainly a 4, despite having some 3 skills shown off in earlier preseason games. We'll see. But even if he's playing the 4 again, being a better player is still being a better player, and he had a solid preseason. I already talked about this one, but no rookies in the rotation. Real possibility. We will see where that goes. That is a question to talk about after the first couple games of the season. Remember, though, I should have said this in the last segment. Andrew Nembhard last season, opening night, did not play. Coach's decision. And very quickly proved, hey, I'm kind of important. This team had a great game against the Spurs in their second game and kept going from there. The starters are set. I already talked about that. Obi Toppin, I think more important than his scoring this season could be his rebounding and defense, because I know he can score. I know he can be awesome in transition. For him to be an X factor and keep getting better every game, the rebounding thing is going to be so crucial, because that's where the Pacers have lacked. They can have a 4 who can grab boards. It's going to be important. I didn't realize how many of my notes are also things that were part of my takeaways and answering questions, because a lot of repeating. Okay, 2 more things. 1, the defense. Better against the Cavs. Better against the Hawks, who didn't have Trae Young. Still going to need some work. Definitely going to need some work. They cut the fouls down. They didn't give up a ton of threes. Cavs only took 35, but you can still just see where the fall apart happens a lot of the time. And some of that is new lineups, and some of that is young players. Some of that's a new scheme, but some of it's just discipline and closeouts, and just they have a lot of stuff they can still get better at on the defensive end. And that could be the biggest storyline for the Pacers early in the season, is if they look terrible again on defense for the 3rd year in a row, then they're not going to start out as well as they need to. And that's important for a team that is hoping to take a step forward, to start off well, to have the momentum, to understand what it takes to win, right? They started okay last year and then had a really good November. November was maybe their best month of the season, right? They're going to have to defend well if they want to replicate that and get to halfway point in whatever they were last year, 4th, 5th, whatever it was. If they start slow, and that would mainly be because of their defense, like what the Spurs have on them in the second game last year, 144, something like that. Like that can't happen. That just can't happen this year. They have to be better on defense if they want to win the amount that they want to win. And they got better defensively, but I would still say not good. Not a good product for them by the end of the preseason. Still more work to do on the end of the floor. Look, I think this is going to be my headline if he's in the rotation. TJ McConnell is just inevitable. They just can't not play him to me. And it's not like it's tough because their competing goals are at play, but he was just too good at basically every preseason game. He was kind of like the 8-footer wasn't falling against the Cavs, but the way he can create and put pressure on the rim, just no one else on the Pacers can do that in the way that he can. And that is so important to the way this team plays and the identity they have. If Andrew Nembhard proves, even as a secondary guy, that he can do that he can be the push it down the other team's throat, get to the rim, create for their guys kind of player, that would change this conversation. But I think McConnell just showed, like, I'm kind of needed, especially when Halliburton's not in the game. Someone has to do this stuff, and I am the best at it on the team besides him. And that's true. If Mathurin's passing took a huge step forward, maybe it could be him. Bruce Brown had some reps as the backup one in earlier games. He had 5 assists in their first preseason game, 4 in their third one. Maybe it can be him for a little stints, but McConnell's just another level of rim pressure and making a defense react in a way that helps other guys be open and helps shots be available. And that's important. And if it means a rookie doesn't play, that's what it means. I think I would still be trying to find ways to get Jarris Walker minutes, but McConnell played well in the preseason. And that means I think minutes probably will be coming his way. TJ McConnell, inevitable, but unsurprising. He did deserve it. He played quite well in some of these games. Thank you guys for getting through these preseason games with me. It was a great time. It was fun to have actual basketball to talk about again and not be guessing what we're going to be talking about anymore. The last person who had to guess what we're going to be talking about before the preseason, Rhett Bauer, will be back tomorrow to, instead of talking about preseason, talk about the regular season, the real games. We'll talk about questions. We'll talk about predictions. We'll talk about the Pacers, because regular season hoops is here. Tuesday, the NBA begins. Wednesday, the Pacers begin, and then we're off and running. Adam Friedman and I will do our yearly show, Overreactions to the Pacers' first game of the season. Always fun. I will listen to last year's and report back with what dumb stuff we said, so that you can know if we're good at overreacting or not good at overreacting. Remember, they lost to the Wizards on opening night last year. So lots of fun stuff coming, and they're about the real games. Thank you all for listening to these preseason exhibition shows. Hope you guys really enjoyed them and are excited for the season. Hope you all had a great weekend. We will see you soon.